The 151st day of class, and today was a cleaning out the closet. And you can see here is the link to click on that, and I've taken the liberty of getting it ready. And I asked you in class to take a big sheet of paper, put it into 6 sections, and here are the 6 sections. Democracy. It's the Cold War. Any person, any idea that had to do with democracy, that would be that one column. Any individual, any idea that had to do with communism would be the second column. Economic concept, the third. Political concepts, the fourth. Cold War outcomes, what happened in the end, would be the 5th column, and military terms, anything that had to do with military. And if you look over here, I threw everything in the kitchen sink at you. These are all the terms from your textbook chapter on the Cold War. So, where do they go? Superpower. I think that is a political concept and a military term. After World War II, USSR and America emerged as the 2 superpowers, so I would go there. Now, ABMS, these are obviously military terms. These were the tools of the trade to, scare the world in the Cold War. Very, very powerful weapons. Ronald Reagan, President of the United States, pro-democracy. Détente. Now, détente is a lessening of tension, so I could put that into politics. I could put that into military. So it's when you mellow out. Now, Fidel Castro, communism. He was the communist leader of Cuba. JFK, leader of America during the Cuban Missile Crisis in the early 60s, clearly pro-democracy. Ideology, it's a way of thinking. That is a political concept. It's also an economic concept. Capitalism versus communism. Democracy versus communism. And the way of thinking was very, very important during the time. I mean, it affected everything. Now, Khrushchev and Brezhnev, these were the 2 Russian leaders during the Cold War, pro-communism. Containment, it's a philosophy. It's a military term and it's a political term. We're drawing a line. Don't cross this line, communism. If you do, we're going to bring in our military and take care of it. Recession, an economic term. Obviously, with this spending going on in the Cold War, it's going to have an economic impact on things. So that's recession. Suburbanization. Suburbanization, I would argue, is an economic concept. And in the Cold War, in the United States in particular, the suburbs, the city we go to school in, Livonia, was born in 1950. It was this notion of, white picket fence and 2 cars in the driveway. So that's an economic concept. Segregation, discrimination, and these 2 items were going on, unfortunately, during the 20th century, in the United States. And I'm going to argue these are political concepts, but also economic concepts. If people have less access to political rights, they're going to have less access to financial situations. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., clearly pro-democracy, promoting the ideals of democracy. Konrad Adenauer, this guy took over West Germany. And imagine having to be the guy taking over after the horror show of the Nazis after World War II. And as the leader of West Germany, the democratic portion of Germany, there were 2 Germanys at the time, he led the West Germans. Welfare state, and European community, gross domestic product. 3 economic terms. And the rise of the welfare state during this time, during the Cold War, did happen. And the European community, this notion of let us band together. Obviously, in modern times, a common currency, the European Union, this is the precursor of that. And gross domestic product, the outcome of a nation. I have a salary, countries have a GDP. Now, collectivization, pro-communism, it's when you take everything and you redistribute it. If you recall in class, I took all of your pencils and I gave 2 back. That is collectivization. I collectivized the pencils. If I gave everybody the same grade, take the class average, everybody gets that grade. That's collectivization. That's part of communism. The Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. This is when Mao Zedong really increased the communist, I don't know what word I want to use, the communist impact in China. Just revamped it in a very, very pure communist image, and that went on here. Now, in terms of 28th to 38th parallel, this is a military term. This divides the North and South Koreans. It's also a Cold War outcome. After the Korean War, that was the outcome. It's also a political concept that this line divides a communist nation to the north and a capitalist nation to the south. Kim Il-sung, this would be the leader of North Korea, obviously pro-communism. Syngman Rhee, South Korea, democratic. And again, South Korea and North Korea, don't get them confused. Even though they're next to each other geographically, they couldn't be more different in a lot of respects politically. The Pusan perimeter, the DMZ, guerrilla fighting, clearly military terms. Now, in the Cold War, there's a lot of lines, a lot of places, you know, if you cross the line, we're going to have this kind of issue. So the DMZ, Pusan perimeter, two examples of that. Now, guerrilla fighting, that's when a smaller army has to go against a big army. Sneak attack, run. Sneak attack, run. So clearly a military term. Ho Chi Minh, the communist leader of Vietnam, would be in the pro-communism section. Dien Bien Phu, military battle. This is where the Vietnamese defeated the French. Now, about a decade later, America shows up and did essentially the same thing as the French, thinking, I don't know what they were thinking, saying, hey, we're different than the French. The French didn't know what they were doing, but we had a very, very similar outcome. That was the battle where the French said, okay, enough of this noise. We are out of here. Domino Theory. Now, that is a political concept, but it's also a military concept because at the time they felt if one country turned communist, they all would. The whole region would. So even though it's a political idea, to back up that political idea, it entailed bringing in the military, in particular Korea and Vietnam. In terms of the Viet Cong, this is the communist group in Vietnam, so pro-communism. Tet Offensive, brilliant. The Tet holiday, you know, that's like Christmas and Easter wrapped into the one. It's a high Buddhist holiday. And they, you know, had a ceasefire saying, we're going to worship during this day, no fighting. And I'll tell you what, if you were a soldier and you had the day off, you took advantage of it and you relaxed and you had a good time. And then they coordinated over 100 simultaneous attacks on the morning after Tet. So the Americans felt they had the day off, that there would be no fighting, and they coordinated the attack. By the way, George Washington did the same thing. He attacked the Hessians on Christmas morning after they were having their Christmas party on Christmas Eve and had great success. So keep your opponent, keep them surprised and you'll have some success. The Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, this was when communism hit Cambodia and a horror show of death from the Khmer Rouge. It was called the Killing Fields in communist Cambodia. The Mujahideen, and the Mujahideen were fighters in Afghanistan fighting the communist Russians in the 80s. So the Mujahideen were freedom fighters fighting against the communists. And I remember as a kid there was a movie called Rambo 3 where Rambo joined the Mujahideen to fight the Russians. It was Cold War propaganda at its best right there. Mikhail Gorbachev, now he's a tough one because obviously as the leader of the USSR, he was communist, but his policies allowed for Russia to become more democratic. So I even saw some people put his name in between. So that's a tough one. It depends. Now, during his leadership, glasnost and perestroika happened in Russia, and it was openness, and all of a sudden, you know, we saw McDonald's in Moscow and Levi's, and I remember as a kid watching MTV, we shipped off a bunch of American musical artists to go to Russia and, you know, have the kids rock out to, you know, these American bands. The high school I went to had one of the first groups of American students to go there. You know, shoot, I mean, ever at that point. It was 1991, and so the spirit of openness and bringing in, you know, American people and American corporations and that kind of thing. Lech Walesa, the Polish hero, he was an electrician. He wanted a fair wage, but he was in communist Poland, and him and his people got together and formed the Solidarity movement, saying we want democracy, we want capitalism, we want to command our own wages, and he fought. And he was in a jail cell, but he got out of that jail cell and became the president, became a hero. And again, fighting for workers' rights, fighting for democracy. Lech Walesa. Václav Havel, he was a poet, and he was able to get communism out of Czechoslovakia without a drop of blood being spilled. He you know, used his words, and it's a beautiful thing that in history it doesn't always have to end in violence. So Václav Havel, clearly on the pro-democracy side. just like Lech Walesa. And the last man we learned about, evil sucker, Nicolae Ceausescu from Romania. Horrible, horrible man. Communism, and he committed some atrocities. So I threw everything at you because you should have learned about this last year. And most of you profess to remembering the vast, vast majority. So I appreciate the teacher that went before you. But for those who had an off year or those who needed a refresher, I hoped this served as that and that it gives you a framework to work with as we put some more details into our Cold War learning in the days ahead. So thank you for watching.